it seems that the Prime Minister's environment minister, radical environment minister, has announced an infrastructure plan. More soul-sucking traffic, more gridlock, and anyone who is driven through the GTA has come to expect that highways are gridlocked, they'll sit in traffic, missing productive time, missing time with their families. And it's the Liberals' radical environment minister who only wants to see this get worse. Not only that, we have a deputy prime minister who's just as out of touch. When she isn't being driven around by taxpayer-funded chauffeurs, she lives in a world that is separate from the reality of most Canadians, and frankly, from the reality of almost anybody on this meeting, on this call. So bragging that, I don't own a car, that's a direct quote. I'm like, I don't know, 300 meters from the nearest subway, I walk and I take the subway. Here's the problem, though. Not all Canadians live on a subway line, and Canadians already send their tax dollars to Ottawa for road infrastructure. So when we have an environment minister who announces a new policy, then it's incumbent on a committee to study that and at least call the environment minister. That's exactly why we're calling the environment minister and his colleagues to appear before this transportation committee and to hold them accountable for the extreme and reckless policy positions that he has put forward. And in case the committee doesn't recall, like the member from St. Catharines, Mr. Biddle, was proud to run a victory lap, it is his history of activism that in 2001 had him arrested and charged with mischief for scaling the CN Tower as part of a Greenpeace stunt. And I know that 2001 is long ago, but even in 2019, in an interview, he said, in many ways, you were still the guy who climbed the CN Tower. Those are his words. I am still the guy who climbed the CN Tower. So after 2.5 years of his tenure as Liberal Environment Minister, there is no doubt that that statement was true. He has proven himself to Canadians to be a radical, far-left Greenpeace activist that he has described himself to be. And his actions as Environment Minister haven't made any constructive change or positive steps towards protecting the environment, balanced with the reality that Canadians face to navigate the high interest rates driven by deficits and inflation, and of course the carbon tax that this government continues to impose on everyday Canadians. Rather, he has sought to divide, virtue signal, and implement an extremist agenda at each point of his tenure. He has doubled down on the punishing carbon tax that certainly doesn't work and that floods the government coffers with hundreds of millions of dollars that makes Canadians poorer and not richer. He's got an effective ban on fossil fuel development at a time where Canadians and frankly the world needs our natural resources more than ever. And the latest, announcing that the Government of Canada will no longer build any roads that connect our communities, that drive economic prosperity for millions across the country, and frankly are the only way to get goods and people and everything else from one place to another where they are not 300 meters from a subway or have the transportation networks that are required. We've got broken ports in this country. Frankly, ports that come up as last on any list of efficiency of getting goods into the country. We have a road system that if you ask anybody who sits in traffic anywhere in the GTA, in Greater Vancouver, in Montreal, in Ottawa, why they're sitting in their cars for hours at a time, if you ask them if our road system is effective, they will surely tell you no. And so to see this environment minister, this radical activist environment minister, tell Canadians from coast to coast, tell premiers and tell mayors that they're no longer funding roads, I think this committee ought to hear directly from him. I think that he needs to answer to Canadians. That's exactly why we've brought this motion here today. And that's exactly why we want to hear from him and his colleagues about the direction of this government rather than a laundry list of how government policy hasn't changed despite the fact that the government has announced a change in policy. You heard it directly from the words of the Environment Minister. So rather than playing defense for the radical Environment Minister, I think the Canadians ought to hear him at this committee. So bringing it back to the motion rather than the diatribe we heard from the member from St. Catharines, Mr. Biddle, I think that we should refocus this discussion on bringing the government's Environment Minister and his colleagues to committee to answer to Canadians on why they want to stop construction of roads, why they want to continue with their radical agenda of environment policy, which is going to quadruple the carbon tax and stop people from driving their cars, transferring their goods, and seeing one another.